And what happens is that these people who are being tortured then start saying there was a plot to do this, there was a plot to do that. These are plots that didn't exist, but the people who are doing it are caught up in it. They believe that everything that this guy's coming out with is the truth. Now, this doesn't become something that the follow-on doesn't involve anybody else. It also involves name. So then the guy, whoever it is, it's Zubaydah in the box, it's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being waterboarded. Then they start coming up with names of people. Where are they? Who are these people? Where are they? Then the guys start going after these guys. And, if you've got a situation where the guys that they're going after are people who, they're just somebody that they knew. They're not part of this terrorist network. They're innocent people. Their names have been come up with by somebody who's being tortured. Then what happens? Then the guys are rounding these guys up. And then they're like, these guys aren't answering the questions. Yeah, well, it's because they're innocent. No, it's not. It's because they're resistant to questioning. They're Al-Qaeda. We better torture them as well. Yep. And some of this has been happening. And that to me is very scary, that it isn't just the torture of these individuals. It's that the torture leads to more torture.
That's a very good point. When you talk about the truth of this is getting out, it's getting thicker in the public discussion, the meme, the narrative or whatever is getting out there more. I've noticed, in fact, just today, there are two major headlines. One of them about John Ashcroft, the other Douglas Fife, defending the torture memos, defending their role in it. And, if I was these guys' lawyers, I would be telling them, why don't you shut your mouth? Why are you taking part in this? And, of course, it was just, I guess, a month or so ago. Let's see, actually, I have it here. It was, in May, the end of May, when Condoleezza Rice said, and I love this quote, too. I mean, this just goes to show exactly what she's thinking. I think this is so honest. She says, well, at least the first part of it's honest. The fact is that after September 11th, whatever was legal in the face of not just the attacks of September 11th, but the anthrax attacks, which were never solved, we were in an environment in which saving America from the next attack was paramount. So there she's even deliberately bringing up, she is admitting that she knows she broke felony statutes, federal anti-torture laws. Whatever was legal, she says, the environment was, it's such an emergency, we have to break those laws. Seems to me like these people, I don't know what they're doing, trying to get out in front of this argument before the grand juries convene, or what?
Well, I think there's two strands to it, actually. I mean, and I think you're right. I think I've noticed more, obviously the anthrax thing has come up. I know that from the little bits I read of Jane's book that it's mentioned in there, and it's mentioned how the administration was consumed with this idea that there was another attack imminent, and that's being presented as a justification. It's like, well, not that they'd even say, well, actually, there wasn't another attack, because they'd probably say, well, actually, I strongly suspect that what we did foiled what was going to happen.
Oh, but yeah, Jose Padilla was going to set off a dirty bomb.
But, I just think that's it. And I think they're trying to justify it. And I think also the John Yoo was interesting, because he was the first one of the guys who worked on the memos to authorize the use of torture, who came out last year kind of boldly saying, listen, you might not like it, but it's a legal opinion at the end of the day. And, your legal opinion is different from my legal opinion. And he's trying to shift the argument beyond, there are lines that you do not cross. And, this is criminally negligent, the way that you read the law. This is breaking the law. He's just trying to say, all of the law is about opinions. It's, one person's opinion against another. And we came up with this one. And, the fact that you don't agree with it doesn't make it a bad thing. And I think that's going to be a hard one to fight.
Well, I think you're right that that'll probably work well for him. But, of course, we know that, well, say, for example, in mafia cases, they prosecute lawyers they say, no, you're not really a lawyer. You're actually a guy whose job it is to just scam the way around the law to help the mobsters commit crimes. So you're just as guilty as them. You're in the same RICO statute as them. The government prosecutes private people for that kind of thing all the time.
Right, exactly. And if you're looking at the lawyers driving this, and particularly, we have to look at just one man, David Addington, trying to push everybody as far as possible, see how much he could break, how much he could, ensure that executive power was completely unfettered. This is kind of the big problem with it all. At the heart of it is actually some of that legislation that was passed right at the beginning, so the authorization for the use of military force, which appears still really to be treated as though this president is permanently at war. He will be at war until the moment that he gives that power. And the next president, if he wanted, could carry on behaving as though it's a war-like emergency every minute of the day. And, that document and the ones that created the enemy combatants, the military commissions in November 2001, so September and November 2001, those are the documents that give the president these tyrannical powers, these powers of a dictator, to override any criticism from anybody, to apprehend anybody that he wants to and imprison them as an enemy combatant without charge, without trial, without ever having to do anything about it, forever if required.
Right, which brings us to Al-Mari.
Well, exactly. I mean, I was moving it to Al-Mari because, of course, that's exactly, what's just been decided
Here's the thing about
by the Fourth Circuit Court.
Here's the thing about the authorization to use force. And I don't have both different drafts in front of me to compare and contrast. I guess maybe I should do that. But I remember part of the story was that Tom Daschle and a few of the senators, the Democratic senators, actually took out a lot of the wish list language from the authorization to use force. And particularly, I thought the part that declared America part of the battle space, part of the battlefield, where people could have their phones tapped, be kidnapped and declared enemy combatants, etc., that the Senate actually said no to that and revised the language to make sure that that kind of unlimited authority wasn't built into the thing.
Well, I know that there have been particular struggles about that because, of course, it's ended up that we're only dealing with a very small number of people, and there have been problems from the beginning. I know from having studied the Guantanamo stories that the prisoners all have unique numbers, and there isn't a number one. And I think that there isn't a number one because that was John Walker Lind, and they had worked out they were excluding foreigners from any kind of legal protections whatsoever, but that it was going to be pretty tricky to do that with Americans. Now, I think their overriding desire was that if they thought that they had an American terrorist suspect in mind, then they were damn well going to do the same thing to them anyway, because the whole intention of the administration was to break down all the kind of liberal laws that had been preventing them from being the real tough guys that they wanted to be. And, the law is for wimps. This is a war unlike any other. I mean, that's what they were endorsing from the beginning. At the whim of the president, you can imprison a man forever. It doesn't really matter where they come from, to be honest. If that's your notion of how you run things, you've kind of forgotten about democracy. But, there was, of course, then there was Yasser Hamdi, who was the American who was in Guantanamo, but they thought he was a Saudi. And as soon as they discovered that he wasn't, then they had to get him out of Guantanamo because that was exclusively a non-American zone. But the Al-Mari case and Jose Padilla, we talked about Padilla before, and they're shocking because they apply to Americans, and I'm shocked that as somebody who isn't an American, I'm having to make a big noise about things that a lot of your fellow citizens seem to think isn't really a big deal at all. And it genuinely is. If your president can throw you in jail, throw away the key, never have to explain why he's done it, everybody should be really worried.
Yeah, never mind what they think. You're doing the right thing. Keep doing it. Well, and another part of this is how, at least in the early days of this thing, there just seemed to be no rhyme or reason whatsoever. As you said, John Walker Lind, he was, detainee number one, but then they actually were going to give him a trial. They ended up, he plea bargained and got 20 years in regular prison here in America. Then you had Moussaoui, who actually probably really was an enemy combatant if there ever was one in this country, a guy who actually was tied to the 9/11 hijackers and that kind of thing. They gave him a civilian trial. But then they arrest this guy Abu Ali in Saudi Arabia, who supposedly, and we all know they tortured it out of him and it's complete bull, but he was supposedly going to murder George Bush, and he wasn't an American, and he was arrested in Saudi Arabia, and they gave him a trial in Virginia. And then they told the paintball terrorists in Virginia, plead guilty, or we'll call you enemy combatants and turn you over to the Navy. This whole thing is just a bunch of made-up shit.
Well, yeah. I think you just hit the spot there.
Sorry,
well, it is, but I mean, and that's absolutely true when you're trying to make any sense of looking at, what kind of verdicts have come out of here when these things have got anywhere near courtrooms, and that's very worrying, that's worrying in and of itself, but I mean, it's still more worrying that what lies behind that is people who aren't even allowed to get anywhere near a courtroom. You know, and with Almari, that's kind of what we're looking at now. I mean, this guy, what are we on, 6.5 years that he's been imprisoned, a legal U.S. resident